is Isaias Hernandez. I am an environmentalist and creative under the moniker Queer Brown Vegan, where I create ecological literacy through digital media, storytelling, and public speaking. My origin story with environmentalism started off in Los Angeles, California. My parents had both immigrated from Mexico in the late 1980s to Los Angeles, and I grew up in extreme poverty. I lived in Section 8 housing, lived on welfare, was on food stamps, and I remember at a very young age recognizing that my environment where I lived in had limited access to green spaces was the first thing. As I got older, as a middle schooler and a teenager years, that's when I started to learn more about the importance of conservation. And I eventually learned about global warming. I reconnected it back to my neighborhood as I got older. For starters, I was living nearby old industrial facilities, some of them that were still operating until the late 2000s. And right across my apartment was the Metrolink and also where freight trains would pass on there in Los Angeles. And it's very interesting because basically every time it would pass, it'd be like a mini earthquake. And I was also off of the San Fernando Road, which is one of the longest roads in Los Angeles. And there was a lot of traffic pollution. And I remember just recognizing that I had accepted that as a normal environment. I said that is a normal ecosystem, but it wasn't until I was working with my dad on the weekends to go garden homes because he was a landscaper that I recognized how much environmental inequity existed, where I would go to these rich, affluent towns and garden with my dad in Bel Air, Calabasas, Beverly Hills, and realizing more and more wow, these communities have a lot of resources. It must be nice to be rich. And that's when I realized that wow, all these communities definitely are deprived from resources like mine. And so that got my curiosity into environmental justice, which I'll be honest, I didn't really understand it that much. I just said, oh, it just means having clean air and water. But I realized that race is a large component. And so that kind of clicked in my head to realize this is not a government conspiracy theory about poor communities not having access to green spaces. This is actually influenced by political decisions that were done decades ago to harm future environments and future communities that would live there. And yeah, that's really how I got my start. And I studied environmental science at UC Berkeley because I always just thought that environmentalism was a way for me to really express myself through that angle. Queer Brown Vegan was created in 2019 as a way to really explore my relationship with environmental science and education. So after I graduated from college, I really struggled to get an environmental job at a nonprofit. And I just thought I wasn't good enough to be in the environmental industry. And so I worked at this creative agency my first 2 years out of college. And I remember just feeling lonely and sad of not using my degree to teach environmentalism. And I just said, this isn't really the way of life that I really want to go. And so I ended up creating Queer Brown Vegan in 2019 as a way to just talk about environmental issues because I realized that there wasn't that much environmental education happening. But the second thing is mainly because I really just saw this as a very fun project to get myself more motivated to do things because my work was draining me. It's very interesting to see the basis of Queer Brown Vegan really evolve is that I describe it more as an environmental media education platform because we do really focus on not just producing content that is thought-provoking, but more through a cultural analysis and working with nonprofits today to do that, and also having our independent web series to kind of get younger people inspired of how they can create their own TV shows on YouTube, or even creating ecological field trips that pair impact-led events to get younger people involved and looking at local solutions and local issues on the ground. And I felt that Queer Brown Vegan has created legacy for itself, and I think it's been really great to be able to be part of that. My biggest approach on work is making things accessible and making sure that no one is ever left behind, because I know how frustrating it is for young people to feel disempowered. And I really wanted to showcase to other queer and also Latino environmentalists of color that they do have the ability to be in this space, and that our stories are not just used for textbook recommendations, but that our stories and our current lived experiences today are seen front and forward. And I really wanted to shatter what people think about environmentalists when they think about that, because a lot of our biases that we have here in the United States is that when we think about environmentalists, we probably think about Greta Thunberg, David Attenborough, Jane Goodall, which are all amazing environmentalists. I'm not saying they aren't, but it's to say that why is it that the white person is the first thing that we think of? And that's because of media cultural phenomenons that have happened of what we think. And so I think it's important for us to really unravel those ecologies, and what better way is Gen Z doing that is through digital media and redesigning a new narrative. What I've been able to do as a media creative myself is that I've been working on this independent web series. It's called Teaching Climate Together, where basically we pair up an academic scholar, a grassroots activist, or an environmental leader in a specific state, and we go around to define a climate terminology or an environmental term that we think is very unique, and how does it apply to a local issue, what's happening. And so our second episode actually released was on urban ecology in Los Angeles. And basically what we did is that we worked with the scholar to kind of talk about what does an urban ecologist do? And it was kind of this PBS style type episode that I had inspiration from. What we really wanted to do is that we wanted to measure the impact. So through a digital media campaign, we had up to 1 million plus impressions, which is great for someone who was only running this campaign through YouTube and some shorts and LinkedIn and other things. But the second thing is that was more the impact is that we paired it with an in real life event. So one of the things that our community has been asking for is events and connections and accessibility. So originally we had this field trip. It was called the Urban Ecology Hike in the Los Angeles River, and we posted this event a week before. I had only assumed maybe 10 or 20 people max would show up to this event, but we nearly had 80 plus people show up. And it was very interesting to see that, a large portion was from my community, but the other portion was from people from different websites looking for environmental events to get people together. And I was truly blessed to see the amount of outreach, but it was really great to also get the organizations that were working there to really partner up and to learn more about those issues on the ground. I think the important thing to remember is that out of that event, I think we got 50 signups for an org that does locally work there in the LA River that now had new volunteers and new people that were interested. Lessons I've learned doing environmental media work is that we have a communication crisis, and environmental media is a climate solution. First starters is that when I created Queer Brown Vegan, I found my why, and I found this really good study. It was by the Pearson's Global Learning Survey, and it said that a large percentage of young people people today, adults, did feel like they did not learn enough about climate in high school or middle school. And if you ask anyone generally, raise your hand if you learned a lot about climate change or global warming in high school, a lot of people will be like, not really. I mean, I learned about the term, but that's pretty much it. And I think that for environmental media, I did research more in looking at the ways that people are learning today. And it was really interesting to find that 25% of young people are learning about climate through social media, which is 1/4. I mean, if you look at the 2000s and 2010s, maybe that's way less, but now we're in a new generation, right? We're in the 2020s now. A lot of young people are using social media as a way to learn about climate related issues after not learning enough. And I think the other thing that's very important is that journalism and a traditional journalism is still existent. It's a large percentage. I think it's 30. And then TVs and films are another percentage of that. And I think that's very sad to see that governmental agencies and public education systems are really failing to teach more equitable environmental media and education. And I think that's because academic settings, they often assume that you need to know about these things. So I think for myself, I want to be able to understand that how do we really extend that narrative beyond? And I think the future, what I see environmental media be is that it's going to become more localized. I want to create a pathway of opportunities for young creatives, because as an environmentalist, I feel that a lot of my friends went into nonprofit work. They went into the science route of doing lab work. A lot of them went for corporate sustainability, which is, all each to their own. But I think for myself as a creative, I don't think I could ever have a 9-to-5. I really wanted to create media. And the best thing I've always been told is that if it doesn't exist, create it. Even if it's bad, even if it's whatever, more and more that you build it, the more and more you'll be proud of yourself. And I think that's a testament that I've done with my independent web series is that I remember telling my friends is that I'm not going to wait for a TV network to reach out to me. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to work. Creating your own independent media means you have the own rights to it, you have the own creativity to it, and you know exactly how you wanted the episode to come out. I've already shot 5 episodes of Teaching Climate together, and my 3rd one's coming out hopefully this month, and the 4th one in a few months, and the 5th one very soon. And I'm just so proud of my team because this is something that I've done as a very small scale. And I don't think that we really often at times see environmental media as a thing. And the last thing I'll say is that media industry is predominantly white. So I think we do have an issue again with diversity. And I think it's important for us to be able to tell our stories, but also to show other creatives of color, like, this is how I did it and I want to teach you, because I don't think that it should be gatekept of how things are being done. This event series that I created around Symbiocene with my co-founder Kalpana Arias. Basically, the Symbiocene is a period where symbiotic species come together to regenerate themselves and also to redesign the future. And it's kind of really dismantles the Anthropocene narratives that are harmful, rooted in human supremacy and blaming individuals versus systemic issues. And I think for me, like, the point of creating Symbiocene wasn't just so much of like, it's a Gen Z thing. It's actually not. I mean, we do have Gen Z branding, but it's actually multi-generational. The main thing that we really want to explore in those conversations is that how do we actually create this symbiotic future through different conversations. So I think that the modern environmental conferences have like, how do you reduce your carbon footprint? What does climate change need to be? What policies do we need to be acted? And I'm saying those are all important, don't get me wrong, but I think we need to reach newer audiences. And I think for me, what has made the Symbiocene successful in different events that we've had it last year is that it's the audience that we bring. It's the idea that we're not really talking anymore about what climate youth activists should do. We are talking more about our interests and how that relates to the work that we do and how that sustains us. Because I've often felt that, I have to separate my artistic through environmentalism at these very corporate conferences. But in fact, I really can't separate that because that's always been a part of me. And I think that's one thing where I think what needs to be evolved is that grassroots communities have always done this. I mean, they still continue to do this, don't get me wrong, like teach-ins about fossil fuels or what's happening in local communities, or from, bringing people together for lectures. Like, these are all important things. And I've often felt more valuable in those spaces. When I picture about a better world through a symbiotic future, I think about the term ecological wealth. And this is something that's been very important to me. I think a lot of immigrant children grow up with this concept of the American dream or generational wealth. And generational wealth is unsustainable in an over-consumer society that upholds unsustainable futures. And this is mainly because I think that generational wealth is only focused on the individual well-being or the family well-being of those select few individuals. And I think with ecological wealth, it really pushes you back from generational wealth and to recognize that I can no longer focus on building generational wealth, but to reframe my relationship of valuing all multi-species through ecological wealth. And that can look through both conceptual framework or more realistic framework. And to me, I felt that building ecological wealth is very different for each and every person. I think for me, it's about reconnecting to localized food systems through foraging. That's an act of ecological reverence. If you look at it through just like a systemic lens, is that I think that we're trying to create a well-being economic system today. And that's really rooted on understanding that all species are sacred. I think the dominant capitalistic models are often very focused on a certain extractive method that talk about these sustainable yields, whether you look at forestry, whether you look at fishery. But in fact, like, a lot of the times they're only calculating for certain species that they gathered and don't account for the other species that were hurt or killed in that process, that are not worth in the sense of the capital lens, but through the ecological lens, they're very rich to the ecosystem. They are creating that symbiotic relationship. So I think for me, that is what the future I envision, is that we really teach younger generations the importance of having semblance rather than this individualistic competition mindset that we have. I think the best way to sustainably love yourself is through community, and always reminding yourself of the importance of how much connection can keep individuals grounded in times of crisis.